want you guys to think like if I said, all right, what's the opposite operation, or what's the opposite of going up? Now you wouldn't say the right, because that's not the opposite. It's definitely different, but the inverse direction of up would be down. Okay? And then if I said left, what's the inverse of left? You wouldn't say up or down. See, like this is the family of inverses amongst these two words, okay? But then you would say right is the inverse of left, okay? So let's use that, and we're gonna try to come up with the inverse equation, okay? Now I'm gonna talk about 5 principles of inverse equations right now, okay? So 5 properties or principles of inverses. Number 1, the t-tables, so the t-charts, they're swapped, okay? So the domain and the range, they're exactly the opposite, okay? Like Freaky Friday, they just swap. Now the equations, when it comes to the equations, you just swap the variables, just like with the t-charts, and you solve for the other variable. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about here in just a moment. Now when we're looking at the graph of an inverse, the graphs are a reflection of one another over the y equals x line. A y equals x line is a linear equation that has a slope of 1, so it's going to be a diagonal line that goes like this, okay, and it has a y-intercept of 0, so it's crossing right through the origin. And then lastly, or I'm sorry, second to last is notation. So the notation for a function's inverse is denoted like this with this little -1. Okay, and the last thing, we talked about compositions before, but a composition is when you take one function and substitute it into the other. Whenever you do that with 2 inverse functions, the answer is always going to be simplified all the way down to just the variable x, or 1x. Okay, so whether you take the inverse and you put it into the function, you'll get x, or you take the function and put it into its inverse, you'll always get x. So let's run through a couple quick examples briefly, and then we'll do like a legitimate, like trying to find the inverse equation. Okay, so looking right here, I have a t-chart, okay? What would be the inverse t-chart of this one, okay? And then down here I have a graph. What would the inverse graph look like for this one right here? So remember, it's reflecting over the y equals x line. Okay, think about it for a second, pause the video. I'm going to give you the answer. So if the x is -8, -4, 0, 4, right? Now that's going to swap with the y, and the answers for that would be 0, 3, 6, 9. So notice all of the y values here are now the x, and then all of the y values over here are now the x values previously. Okay, so the domain and range, they swap. Okay, now down here looking at this graph, if I was to reflect this, like if I was to draw a y equals x line, that'd be a line that looks something like this. Okay, so the reflection of that, so I just like to take it in pieces sometimes. So this one would go this way. This little swoop right here would then go like that, and then this little line right here would go like that. So the inverse of that black line would be the green line. And that's how you can tell if something is an inverse. Okay? Let's jump into this. So it says finding the inverse of this function. So first thing what I want to do whenever I have a f of x here is I want to replace the f of x with a y. Okay? Just get my 2 variables, x and y. Then the next thing, I want to swap the x and the y. So wherever I see the x, I'm going to swap it with a y. And then the third step, okay, is I'm going to solve for the other variables. So that means, see the y right now, it's got all this stuff over here. I want to get it by itself. So how do I solve for that? Well, I'm going to first add 2 to both sides. And then how do I get rid of the square? I'm going to take the square root. So take the square root of this whole side, not just the x or the 2, the whole side. And whenever you take the square root, you always got to put plus or minus. And so now I've got this equation right here where I've got plus or minus square root of x plus 2. And then the last thing is just to change the notation. Let's bring it back to the f of x, but we're not going to put f of x. We're going to put f inverse of x, and that would be the correct notation. So I wrote like 10 right here to help you remember. So the t charts, so the x and y, they're going to swap, okay? The e's, you're solving for the other variable, and the n is writing the notation correctly, okay?